Wendy, welcome to the pod.
I'm very happy to share my story, how I developed a multi-million-pound property portfolio. Since then, I've become more involved in politics.
Are you excited and optimistic about the future of Great Britain right now?
That's a really good question. The British spirit is incredible, but it is being quashed by what's happening right now. Capitalism may not be a perfect solution, but it's the least worst solution that we have.
What would you say the solution is to helping the poor in a capitalist society?
Education as emancipation, education as freedom. This is the ticket. We have not had any government who has really supported the small business or entrepreneur sector. Taxation of any market eventually leads to a complete lack of choice. And if we want to be a country where we have no choice, you're going to be very happy in the UK. We're nearly at £3 trillion worth of national debt, and this is not reducing. And yet this government claims to be a government. Sorry, I'm getting on my political high horse now.
So you belong to the Reform Party.
Yes.
Are you racist? Is your property journey? Can you take me just through that quickly?
He was frustrated because the valuation office agency had banded each of the rooms in his HMO individually for council tax. The government decided that they would make this unlawful. That put the fire in my belly. I realised I could do some more campaigning.
So you had young kids at the time of your building phase.
Yeah.
How did you find that? And what was the hardest thing?
Well,
Wendy, welcome to the pod.
thank you, Dylan. It's lovely to be here.
I wonder if you could just start by telling people that might not know who you are, what value or benefit you think they can get from listening to us today.
My background is a mixed, varied background. I ended up in property development about 12 years ago, more seriously than I'd ever done before. I dabbled in it before as a bit of an amateur, had a small portfolio, but then from about 2014, I really threw myself into it. I'm very happy to share my story, how I developed a multi-million-pound property portfolio, how I focused on HMOs as my main strategy. And if people want to know more about that, I'm very happy to talk and discuss how I did that. But equally, since then, I've become more involved in politics because I really believe that making your voice heard and bringing some of my experience of the industry to bear, I believe could really influence and help Great Britain. And I'm now passionate not just about helping me and my family or even just my local community, but I really want to do what I can to help Great Britain.
Are you excited and optimistic about the future of Great Britain right now?
That's a really good question. Long term, I think there is huge potential. I think the British have an incredible ability to, they've got resilience, they've got strength, they've got determination. They love to explore. We love to do new things. We are great discoverers. The British spirit is undeterred and is incredible, but it is being quashed by what's happening right now. So no, if you look at a day-to-day level at the moment, I'm despairing about what's happening in our great country. I think we have had terrible malign influences and very poor thinking. We've moved away from what once made us great. So I desperately want to see that changed. But I think if change does happen, I think we can be a powerhouse in the world once again. So yes, I actually do have great optimism, but at the moment it feels like walking through treacle.
It's an interesting one because a lot of people blame multimillionaires for all the societal problems. And it gets thrown out there, they're going to Dubai, everyone's leaving, everyone's running. What's inside of you that's making you want to run towards a solution rather than to another country? Or do you want to run to another country?
Well, yeah, we have certainly explored some of those options like many other people have done. But I've committed myself to stay here in the UK for the next few years at least. I think probably until the next general election. Let's see what happens after the next general election. That 2029 is my deadline. But for the time being, I'm going to stay and I'm going to do what I can to change direction of this country. I think that there is a misunderstanding about how capitalism works. Now, we may disagree with capitalism. There will be people who will say capitalism is a terrible system. It doesn't work. We should have a communist or a Marxist system that controls resources and controls goods and services. Unfortunately, I just fundamentally disagree with that. When you look at people's own natural incentive-driven behavior, what we see is that Marxism and communism eventually fail. Every single communist country has always failed. They've either had a terrible currency collapse or social collapse, or both. Capitalism may not be a perfect solution, but it's the least worst solution that we have. So therefore, I very much believe in a capitalist environment, capitalist society. Now, the downside to capitalism is that you are going to find that some people are going to get immensely rich. And we will have a stratification of society whereby you have people who are poor, who are starting off, and you will have very, very rich people on the other side of the equation. And I think the question which politicians have grappled with for so long is, where should we stand morally in position to this stratification of wealth? Do we want to tax the rich much more and redistribute to the poor? Is that our position? Well, that's a socialist position. Or do we agree that actually leaving the free market to run itself eventually actually helps poor people? Because when you have competition, you generally have innovation and lowered prices. And that is the beauty of capitalism, that you see prices reducing, not increasing. So poor people actually benefit from that. But in the meantime, there's quite a lot of pain. Now, this is, of course, the question. And I think in a civilized society, we do want to help the poorest of the poor. We've got to offer something that enables those very, very poor people at the lower end to be supported and helped. But I don't believe that we should be giving so much to those people that we disincentivize them to work. Work is not always pleasant. It's not always easy. It's called work because you have to work at it. But it is the system by which we grow, we learn discipline, we learn how to apply ourselves, we learn what we're good at, and we actually offer service to our fellow man in doing so. And therefore, work is a very, very valuable mechanism for not only enabling people to earn money, but also enabling people to grow. And growth is actually at the heart of this. It isn't just economic growth, which we hear talked about a lot. It's personal growth. And I think by removing that agency from people, by supporting them so much with economic help, giving them too many benefits, for example, is very detrimental to people. So, yeah, I think that there is capitalism may well not be perfect, and there will be trade-offs. But I think it's a very simplistic argument to say we should tax the rich more. We're happy with rich people leaving the UK. I think fundamentally it's going to make the UK a far poorer place for all of us if we take that approach.
So true. And I think it's an interesting topic because when you think of that, in South Africa, where I come from, we had the brain drain, which was all the university educated people, people with trades or doctors, nurses could get into first world countries. And so they'd leave because they were getting paid more. They weren't in, the conditions that they'd be working in South Africa would have been worse. And so you always have this perpetual brain drain happening. And when I look at the UK economy now, when we've seen the talent of the people that have built these industries, jobs, all leaving, that concerns me because it's not just the money that people, if someone's poorer, they just say, let them go, they can go screw themselves. That's kind of the mindset. So you don't realize what that's doing to the temperament of the country, where you disincentivize people taking risk and starting businesses. So when you think of the poor right now, which you've touched on, What would you say the solution is to helping the poor in a capitalist society? If you're saying, okay, socialism, we need, we've got 9 million people on the benefit system now, last time I checked. That's working age population. How do you fix that with a capitalist society?
Many moons ago, I used to work for Sure Start. Sure Start was a government initiative, the Labour government, the first, well, honestly, not first ever Labour government, but in 1997 to 2005, was it 2003? Under Tony Blair, they initiated a program called Sure Start, and this was working with families in deprived areas. And I was a Sure Start program manager in South Cheshire, in Crewe. And my job was to bring together health, social care, and early years education, and to particularly work with families their children were not at so much risk that they were under child protection care or safeguarding, but that the family was at risk where the children perhaps they wouldn't thrive at school. They weren't going to do well at school. So what we did was we brought together these different services, and they were funded in different ways, and there was a lot of government funding that was put into the program. And over time, as part of the program, we had to carry out longitudinal research. So we had to look at specific factors in the program. We had to look at specific measures and trace them through the years of the program. And we ran a number of different investigative research programs to have a look at what made the biggest difference to families, particularly on economic well-being, because that was one of our targets. So we traced a number of different families. We if you like, looked at how they were starting in the program, a year later, 2 years later, etc., as their children grew up. And what absolutely amazed me about the results of this research was it was very, very clear that the biggest factor that made a difference to these families was the educational status of the mother.
Of the mother?
Of the mother in particular. Mostly she was the biggest caregiver. Sometimes, of course, these were single mums anyway, so the dad wasn't really around. We ran classes with South Cheshire College where we provided the childcare, and the South Cheshire College would run literacy and numeracy classes. Now, for a lot of the women who took part in those classes, it wasn't just all mums, it was dads as well, but mostly it was mums. They had not got their maths and English GCSE. Either they'd been pregnant or they had, not been at school. And of course, a lot of these families, it was a cycle of poverty. So they were not the first generation to be living with a child and be a mum under 16 and be on benefits. This had happened to their mums and their mums. We would have people coming into our children's centre who were maybe in their early 40s, and they were grandmothers and sometimes in their 50s, and they were great grandmothers.
Wow.
That used to make me feel, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So they had because they had their children so young. Now, this was very important for me and very illuminating, because I realised that as these mums, yes, sometimes dads as well, became more confident at learning, they suddenly realised that actually maths wasn't so much of a difficult subject. They could do it. And they took their GCSEs and they passed them and they got their certificates. And they began to not just feel confident at being able to tackle something that was hard for them, that was meant they had to study, they had to apply themselves, they had to learn something. There was a bit of discipline to it. They grew in confidence. They grew in being able to take on more challenges. And many of them who thought they were going to be unemployed for the rest of their lives realised they could get a job. Now, not all of them, of course, want to work full time because they've still got, young children, preschool age children. But it was for them that they were working. It wasn't so much for the money anymore. It was for their own well-being and their own growth.
Did you see a difference in mental health there?
Yes. I mean, mental health wasn't such a big issue at that time. What I would say is I don't think we were quite so aware of it. It wasn't so much an issue that had been so well covered in the media, for example. Now it's everywhere. And, people claim this is a reason why they can't work. I think that's a reason why you should work, because actually it'll solve your mental health problems. For many people, it's that having that regular routine of getting up, going to work, having to prepare your lunch at the beginning of the day, having to, get your clothes sorted and get up early in the morning. We know that that is actually very good for your hormone levels and your serotonin in your brain, your oxytocin. They're all kind of fired up in the morning. So yeah, let's do it. As you can see, I am more of a morning person. Don't phone me.
I'm still waking up. Yes. I've had to hide my Lucozade quite a bit.
I have still got my coffee though.
Yeah.
But yeah, this pattern of working is incredibly valuable for people. And what we saw was that over a period of time, these mums who had got their basic qualifications then went on to do other qualifications as they saw the opportunities. And then they got better jobs and they got promoted. And I met one of the mums, a lady called Gemma, in town when I had finished working for Sure Start. I was then lecturing at the local university in early years. And we bumped into each other in the supermarket. And I said, "How are you doing?" She said, "I am now the manager of where I work. And if I hadn't had that opportunity from Sure Start, I would never have achieved this." And what a difference. It was like a different woman. It was like she had not only grown up, she must have been probably in her early 20s by then, but she had totally changed in her demeanor. You could see she was calmer. She was just a different woman. And I was so blown away by that. And I think that was true for many, many, many other families, that it wasn't money, it wasn't early years education necessarily, even though that is a good thing and in a quality environment can really help the children and the family. And I very much believe in that. But it was actually education, education as emancipation, education as freedom. This is the ticket. And so I very much believe now fervently that for a lot of people who are out of work, new skills, retraining, get out there, try and do something new, different. Maybe start as a hobby. You don't necessarily have to start as paid work. One of the problems is, of course, we have a benefits trap. We have a system that is very, very difficult to navigate if you want to go part-time. You're going to lose a proportion of your income from your benefits. You're then put into a negative position. And we have got to change that. We've got to find a way of supporting people into employment where full-time employment may just be too much. It may be too big a step for them to take. We've got to find a way of enabling people to access training, employment, and education that, if you like, rehabilitates them and enables them to take that next step on the ladder. And actually, it doesn't matter what age you are, because again, I think a lot of people think, "Oh, I'm 60, I'm on the scrap heap, I'll just wait to get my pension." No, you've got something to offer to society. You've got something that people want and need. And actually, this is where I also very much believe in entrepreneurship. And I think it is such a shame that over the last 15 years, we have not had any government who has really supported the small business or entrepreneur sector. Because for a lot of people, setting up a dog walking business or a car washing business or a gardening business, they're out in the fresh air, they're doing something positive, they're moving around, they're serving their community, they're earning some money. But this sector seems to have been completely ignored by both the Conservatives and Labour. And yet they make up 98% of the businesses in the UK, small businesses.
Wow. And but that's where, back to incentive, is this, and I want to talk into this because the reason we started the podcast was to have long form conversations around people's lives and whatever kind of gets them going in their business life, their careers and that, but also around the country. Because if we don't start having these conversations, we could be at a turning point that it's going to be impossible to turn later on. And so with the benefit trap that you talk about, I just think a lot of people watching this won't actually realize it. So if someone's watching this on benefits, my hope is that we can get them inspired to go and start a business and, whether that's property, whatever it is, or get employment and get, stuck in. But for those that are watching this, I think, "Oh no, the government should do more. We don't touch benefits." It's a thing. Can you just explain how the system currently works take a single mom with 3 children, how much they could be getting on benefits currently and why it just doesn't work getting them back into employment?
So in that situation, and I'm not a benefits advisor, so at the moment I don't have tables in front of me to quote the exact figures, but I can give you an idea. As a single mum, depending on the age of your children as well, because that has an impact on how much you're entitled to, but you would be able to get universal credit. You would also get benefits for your children. And of course, as we know, the Labour government have just lifted the 2-child benefit cap as well. So you'd get benefits for all your children, whereas it used to be capped at just 2. You would also probably be entitled to social housing and social housing benefit as well. You may get some extra help with your council tax. So as a package, just at that level, that is a significant amount of money. And if you added up all of those, complete with free prescriptions, free school meals, free childcare, you're looking at probably £1,000 a week easily. Now, on top of that, some of those people in that family may well be claiming other disability benefits, PIP. Again, massive amounts of payments on PIP are going out every week as well. So you could be looking at £2,000 a week for that family if you packaged in and costed up all those different benefits.
And they don't pay tax?
Correct. None of it is taxed.
This is the part which, and the reason I asked that question, just to put it out there, is because obviously we deal with housing that we provide for a mixture. So either directly to the council or to tenants that are on benefits, that kind of thing. And obviously you see in reality how this thing works. But when I explained it to a friend recently, I said, some people I know are on like 60 grand a year, and there's no tax. And when you see the cogs working, and he's like, wait, you'd have to be in the city earning,
Yes.
6 figures just to come out with that 60.
Yes.
And then if you want to take your kids out on a Saturday to London, to a theme park or something like that, or an attraction in the city, there's a different pricing category. So if you're on benefits, you get the cheaper tickets. If you are working full time, you've paid your tax. And that's the part I just don't think my generation and younger are actually realizing and coming to terms with, is that this is a big, big cost. And if we add up all of our taxes in this room, we probably aren't paying for 1, 2, maybe 2, 3 people if they're on that full system because of the structuring of our businesses.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's why our taxes have had to increase, because Rachel Reeves can see the sums don't add up.
Yeah.
We're paying out more on welfare than we are bringing in income tax. This is a very, very worrying state of affairs. Anybody who's good at maths, and you don't have to be that good at maths to realise if you're paying out £100 a week and you're earning £90 a week, you're going to be short. And that's why the country is so indebted. We're nearly at £3 trillion worth of national debt, and this is not reducing. So it's a serious position. And for various other economic reasons, this figure, of course, is causing huge risks to the UK economy, because when we borrow money from external financiers, big pension funds, people who buy our gilts and buy our bonds, they now want a higher rate of interest for that debt because they're pricing in risk. And they're looking at the UK economy and saying, well, how stable is it? How much am I assured that I'm going to get my money back? And because I'm a little bit concerned, I'm going to push those interest rates a little bit further that I'm demanding on those bond yields. And so this is why we're seeing bond yields go up and up and up and up. Of course, the war in Iran at the moment is also causing uncertainty and instability. But if we had a much stronger economy, and it's not just the level of debt that we have, the 3 trillion, it's what it represents in terms of GDP. It's now well over 100% of GDP. Different people will quote different figures, but I very much believe it's over 100%. And this is extremely bad for the country to have such high levels of debt relative to GDP. Because what it does is the interest payments get higher and higher and higher every year. And it becomes like a flywheel. You have to borrow more to be able to pay out more. And then you have to tax people more to try and reduce the gap. But actually, as we know from the Laffer curve, you can start to tax people as much as you want to on the higher ends. But we see the behavioural inferences. People leave the country. People reduce the size of their business. I work with somebody who said to me the other day, I'm actually not going to do 5 days a week anymore. He's a contractor. I'm not going to do 5 days a week anymore because it's put me into the VAT threshold and because of how much tax I'm paying. If I do 4 days a week, I can actually earn more money and it's less hassle. So people are reducing their working hours, which is a direct impact of the Laffer curve at work. And I'm sure
Can
people...
you explain the Laffer curve to people that don't know what that is?
So this is the Laffer curve. You can look it up.
We'll get it up now.
Yeah, great. See it on the screen.
Yeah.
Arthur Laffer, who's still alive today, he's a fantastic economist, and he devised this. It's very, very simple. It tracks across an XY axis on a graph how much tax you can actually take from individuals before the level of taxation, the amount, the percentage-wise that you're trying to tax people, reduces in the actual income to the Treasury being reduced because of the behavioural impacts on the additional tax take that you are leveraging.
So if you tax too much, you disincentivize people to a point so you actually bring in less revenue because there's less revenue being made because people aren't taking the risks.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
So going back to the point earlier about we should tax rich people more, this flies right in. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's happening right now. We're seeing that rich people, let's say Charlie Mullins, for example, has moved to Spain and taken his business over there. Because what he decided was, I don't want to stay in the UK anymore. I can live with the income I have. And let's face it, that Spain is still an EU country. It still has VAT at 20%. Income tax is not massively lower there. But I think one of the reasons why people are moving abroad is not just the levels of income tax, it's certainty. When you run a business, one of the hardest things to cope with is not knowing what rate of tax you will be charged, isn't it? You'll know this, Dylan.
100%.
For example, let's look at what's happened to the farmers. The farmers, in 2024, Rachel Reeves announced that inheritance tax for land that was going to be passed on, anything over £1 million would have a much higher rate of inheritance tax. Now, for many farmers, the value of that capital asset they have has to be over £1 million because the yields are so low in farming. So they need to have excess land, a lot of land, in order to get a big enough yield to make an income. Most farmers are not multimillionaires in terms of cash terms, even if on paper, on their balance sheet, they look very, very healthily well off. So this had a terrible effect on farmers. We saw it, didn't we? We saw all the protests. Farmers in their tractors, on the Mall, they had to protest against it, taking a day out of their very valuable time actually looking after their crops and their animals to come and protest. The government then backtracked. Last December, they reversed it to £2.5 million. So they raised the threshold at which that inheritance tax now becomes due. But in that year, how many farmers had either sold, restructured, committed suicide, which is, we know what happened, really been devastated by this announcement? They may have spent 12 months working to try and restructure their business or do creative solutions, find creative solutions for the problem, and then the government does a U-turn. Now, this is incredibly detrimental. It creates a freezing effect, a cooling effect on the economy, because who wants to take a risk in an environment where you don't know whether the VAT rate might go up or it might go down? The income tax rate might go up or it might go down. Look what she announced last year. Property owners, I think it's discrimination that if you are a property owner, if you're a landlord and you get rent from residential property, you're now going to have to pay 2% more on your income tax bill per annum. Is that fair? Is that right? Is that equitable? And yet this government claims to be a government, sorry, I'm getting on my political high horse now.
You go for it. You go for
which
it.
believes in equity. How is this equitable?
But
What if we
don't
said this to
landlords
people
have
who
all the
have
money?
pubs? What if we said this to people who had hotels? What if we said this to people who ran car showrooms? I mean, cars are expensive, aren't they? Those people running car showrooms must be making loads of money. Let's tax them 5% more a year on their income tax. Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. Right, okay. I mean, what does this do to a country? Who's then going to start becoming a landlord? And of course, what we see happening is the market is shrinking one by one by one. Those houses are going back up for sale. And that's great that we've got some turnover. We've got some trading income in property. That's a great thing for people to buy their own home. I'm very, very much in favour of home ownership. But for property investors who represent 20% of the rental sector, that is going to have a very, very big impact. Again, it chills the industry.
It's an interesting point on discrimination because a lot of landlords I've talked to feel discriminate. I wouldn't say, because a lot of people I talk to are very optimistic people because they have to be to get into property, to build a business. You've got to be someone that's a go-getter. You have that positive attitude. You go, but then when I see people getting discouraged to the point where they're exiting, the private landlord sector, and I don't think, again, this is where people don't understand it, is you disincentivizing people being landlords, especially those that have been in the game for a lot longer than myself, where Section 24 comes in and the interest, they can't deduct the interest on their mortgages as an expense. Just a basic economic thing, and it's driving behavior to, okay, we have to incorporate. So everyone goes to incorporating. But as an investor, I'm sitting there, I'm from South Africa. I've seen when governments have an overreach, what happens. And I'm thinking, well, they're just going to end up having a different tax system for property landlords because you have holding companies for these properties, and it's going to be a lot easier to enforce it because you're going to have all the information there, all the tax, returns.
Yes.
But for people watching this, what I don't think sometimes clicks is the relevance to them, why is a rental sector so important to an economy? Just in simple terms, for the average person to understand why it's so important to have a government supporting private landlords and not just going after them.
I think it's about choice. I think it's about choice and freedom. One of the great things that we have in this country, in the United Kingdom, is we are supporters of choice. So that's why we have different types of schools. That's why we have different types of supermarkets. That's why we allow different types of car. So that if you want to buy something that's a bit cheap and cheerful, you can buy a £2,000 slightly bashed up Ford Fiesta. That's your choice. We're not going to say you can't buy that car because it doesn't meet certain standards. Okay, it's got to pass its MOT and you've got to tax it and you've got to insure it. So we have some basic safety regulations there, but that applies to all cars. It doesn't just apply to Rolls Royces and Bentleys. You have to, it applies to the lower end and the upper end. Everybody, it's universal. The problem that we're seeing, and this is where I think the Labour government have got it so wrong, and I think the Greens have got it even further wrong, is that by regulating, by pressing very hard on one area of, in this case, the private rental sector, you're going to stop people, the ordinary person in the street, from having choice. If I, for example, don't want to buy my own house, maybe I haven't got a deposit or I can buy a property, I don't want to necessarily only be able to choose social housing. Of course, waiting lists are so long anyway, I'd have to wait ages. And therefore I have to share with a friend, or I have to, lie on a sofa in a cousin's house, or I have to live with my mum and dad until I'm 50. I don't want to do that. So maybe what I'll do is I'll rent a flat. That sounds great. I'll be a bit independent. I'll find out what it's like to rent. Maybe by renting, because there's such a big choice of rental properties, I can negotiate with my landlord. And my landlord says to me, but, I'm not sure that I'm happy for you to stay just for a short period of time. Would it be okay if we had a 12-month contract? And I say to myself, yeah, I'm happy to stay for a year, as long as we can negotiate the rent down. So if I pay a little bit less rent, but give you the commitment that I'm going to rent for a year, and we have that as a contract between us, are we both happy? Yeah, we're both happy. You can't do that anymore.
Mm.
You're not allowed to do that anymore, Dylan. So the choice for the tenant is restricted. This is not the landlord. This is the tenant. The tenant's choice is restricted. Not only that, of course, with the Renters' Rights Act, the rent that is on offer is the rent that you will pay, or potentially less if you negotiate down. But while the Renters' Rights Act is the purpose behind it was to give more security of tenure for tenants, there are so many hidden what I would call potholes, to bring in a driving analogy there, black holes, things that you will trip up on. For example, the fact that you have to give 2 months' notice, and that notice period has to end on your rental period. So effectively, you might give notice a day after you've just paid your rent. Well, you now have almost 3 months that you have to wait before you can move out of that property and get your deposit back. And of course, you've still got to pay your rent during that time. Now, many tenants will think they won't realise this is happening, even though the government are, cascading all this information down and insisting that we all give them 101 pieces of information, the information sheet about 1,000 times, so that make sure they've read it. But many people won't have read it, and many people will think it's just 1 month, because generally contract law in the UK is based on a 1 month period. That's a sort of standard understanding for various different reasons. So you might get offered a job in Southampton and think, I can't live in Milton Keynes anymore. I need to move. I'll give him my notice. And then your landlord says, yeah, but you've only given me 1 month's notice. I need 2. And it needs to wait till the end of a rental period. So actually that's 2 months and 2 weeks. But I've got to start my new job in a month. They've asked me to start in a month. And I've just given notice to my current employer. Choice destroyed. So this is what happens when the government tries to control and regulate markets, is choice gets squashed. The ability of the consumer, the ordinary person, to say, well, I'd rather have this than that. I'd rather take that than that. I'd rather have big and expensive than small and cheap. I'd rather have low quality and cheap rather than really high quality and expensive. People don't have that choice anymore. And you find that everything becomes the same. And of course, eventually what happens is there's none of it. It disappears totally because, again, going back to incentives, landlords go, do you know what? I'll do something else. Yeah. Thanks very much, but no thanks. I can do something else with my capital. And
are you seeing that with a lot of your friends?
No. Okay. Actually, I don't think... I would say what I'm seeing is doubt. It's doubt creeping into their minds about whether they want to stay as landlords, as they want to stay as property investors. But I think probably the people that I mix in are not people who've maybe just got 1 or 2 properties.
I was about to ask, yeah.
I think it's 49% of landlords have 1 property, and 50% or more have 2 or more properties. And the average size of a portfolio in the UK is 2 properties. 20% of landlords have 5 or more properties, and only 6% of landlords are incorporated. Right. So it's a very, very small section of the market which is incorporated. 94% are not incorporated. Some are in partnerships, LLPs. So, but generally, most landlords, if you took an average landlord in the UK, an average landlord in the UK is over 55. They've been renting out their property, or they've been involved in property for 10 to 15, 20 years. They have a small mortgage on the property. Many, of course, own outright. They own 2 properties, and they look after their tenants. That is the average, the median landlord in the UK. They don't have massive portfolios. They're not multimillionaires. They have a job. They have some other income. They do something else as well. They've done this for a pension. They've done this to provide a service to their local community. They've done this because they maybe want their children to inherit something over and above what they will receive from their estate. And so years ago, they saw a property a couple of miles from where they live, maybe, or in the next town that needs a little bit of TLC. It was maybe going for a good price. Nobody else was interested. First-time buyers wouldn't buy it because it needed too much cash to do it up. The landlord buys it, puts in a new kitchen and bathroom, new carpets, liquor paint, happy days. A young couple moves in, they pay reasonable rent, and they've looked around and they think this is a good value for our money. They raise their children. Maybe they save up for a deposit. Maybe they then go on and buy a property themselves, and the landlord then re-rents that property. And after the 1988 Housing Act, which was equally a big change to the private rental market because it introduced Section 21s and it introduced the notion of an assured short-hold tenancy, this change now with the Renters' Rights Act, I'm saying is as equally a huge change, a huge shake-up to the private rental sector. And coupled with all the tax changes, I think we're going to see some landlords get very scared and leave. Now, that's obviously an opportunity for the rest of us. And it's also an opportunity for you if you want to get on the housing ladder, because a motivated landlord is often very willing to negotiate on the price of a property because they don't live there. And that money is probably surplus to them. They might want to use it in various different ways. That's fine. That's up to them. But they might be willing to negotiate, and it might need a little bit of TLC. So if you're a motivated first-time buyer and you find a motivated landlord, then you could have a really great deal there. So I think in some ways, it's a change of the market. It's not the end of the world. But I think that what we have to recognise is that the government regulation and taxation of any market eventually leads to a complete lack of choice. And if we want to be a country where we have no choice, you're going to be very happy in the UK.
Yeah. This is it, though. It's like the question of choice that I find so interesting with our culture is people don't think through the consequences of decisions that are made today. So they'll just think, oh, it's like delayed gratification. Every property investor I know tends to be on more of the extreme side of delayed gratification because you have to. For years and years, you sowing in, you kind of not seeing much. Yes, your portfolio is building. You can see it, like we were saying in the car, on the balance sheet. You can be wealthy, but from a cash point of view, most property investors I know are cash poor, asset rich.
Yes.
And then you get
exactly, join the club.
And I said to someone the other day, I said, how is it that the bigger I get in property, the poorer I feel so often because you just see these minus figures, and obviously we're building this asset base, but the power of choice later, you have to deny yourself certain things in the present. And what concerns me with government solutions a lot of the time, it tends to just patch it until the next election. So you're not dealing with the long-term consequences of those choices, and you're limiting your citizens, to no long-term growth, really. Because when I look at the UK economy, I'm like, okay, how do we, because the only ways we get rid of this debt problem is either we decrease the debt or we outgrow it, and then our LTV of the economy gets to a more realistic place. But are people willing, to do that? And are
well, I think there's also a bigger question here also about the balance of the private and the public sector. So the public sector is about 42%, 43% of the economy at the moment, and that has grown significantly.
You said the public sector?
Public sector, sorry. Did I say private?
I think you said.
Yeah, public sector. So when I talk about the public sector, I'm talking obviously the civil service, but the police, education, the NHS, all the other services that we pay for from taxation. So in other words, they're not private companies. They are publicly run institutions, all the government quangos, the government itself. Now, when you have 45% of, if you like, turnover, which is basically powered up, paid for by the tax take, that means that 55% of the economy has to be pretty good to be able to pay for the other 45%. So what we really need to do is encourage the private sector to grow. The more that you encourage a bigger share of GDP within the private sector, that should reduce the public sector. And that means that these businesses, the private businesses, private companies, can innovate, They can produce goods and services at a cheaper cost. They will have to do that because there'll be more competition. And also it gives the consumer more choice. It's part of this bigger picture. But it also reduces government expenditure. So this 45%, let's say that shrunk down to 30%, for example, that's 15% less expenditure. Now, what if you paid 15% less tax? Not just income tax, but VAT, council tax. Let's think about all the other taxes that you pay. Corporation tax, all the various other taxes that you pay, whether you notice them or you don't. And, let's say sales tax, for example. When I came in today on the train, I bought a bottle of water, £2.99 for a bottle of water.
Where was it from? The Holy Land or?
I forgot to bring one this morning when I came. Now, that is incredibly expensive for a bottle of water. The point is that, when you are paying 20% VAT, on things that you buy in the shops, you don't really notice it. It's just bundled into the price, isn't it? But if we were paying 10% VAT, you'd see prices start to come down. Prices would be naturally cheaper. But you see the other point that you make, which is how do we get out of this debt cycle that the country is in, not just individuals and families are in through the benefits trap. We're kind of in our own debt trap in the UK. Do we grow the economy? Well, yes, that's most politicians' answer is we have to grow the economy because that's, I would say, the most exciting, energizing focus for our vision. We all want to grow the economy. We all want the economy to be turning over more every year. But at the same time, we have to swallow the bitter pill that also we need to cut expenditure because this 45% is too big and it's growing. And if we don't start to cut the public sector as well, we simply won't have the right balance. We'll carry on this hamster wheel, which turns over, but actually where a lot of it is just skimmed off the top and put into the public sector. So the balance of public and private within the economy is absolutely vital. And the other thing I would say is about inflation. One of the problems, of course, is we have an underlying requirement. The Bank of England have set this as a target that we will have 2% growth per annum. Now, what that really means is 2% inflation per annum. Now, it's obviously higher than that at the moment. I think it's about 4% at the moment. And the Bank of England have said they want to keep it at 2%. What they really mean is we want to devalue the pound by 2% every year because that devalues the debt. And actually, when inflation is hot and higher, it's good for the country because it reduces the size of the debt. And so therefore there is an incentive, there's a built-in incentive for the Bank of England not to worry too much if inflation does get a little bit hot, particularly in a Labour government, because what it means is that the extra debt that they're piling on month is being deflated away. So it has a political benefit for the Labour government, but it doesn't benefit the people. It doesn't benefit you or I who are looking and thinking, that bottle of water, last month it was only £2.40. Now it's £2.99. What will it be next month? And it doesn't benefit the shop who I bought it from. Perhaps I should keep them nameless because I'll be thinking I'm not going to go into that shop and buy water from them again. And in fact, I'll bring water myself. So that little trade that took place, that exchange of goods for money won't happen again. So what if in the future everybody thinks that about everything in that shop and that shop has to close down? And even yesterday I saw, I get a report on my Google feed. It's rather depressing, but it's about companies that are closing down. And there is a big company, I can't remember what his name is, that have just announced bankruptcy. And we're seeing this happen more and more and more across the UK because companies are not able to trade in this environment. They're not able to make profit. Any profit they do make is taxed away from them. So therefore, there's no incentive to trade. So, and because the country as a nation is getting poorer, people have got less pounds in their pocket to buy things. And of course, this stops commerce.
It's an interesting one that, again, when people feel it on, we're doing our private finances because we're quite specific. We know exactly what's spent in each category. And I had my PA doing it, and I said to her, okay, just draw up. I said, if you had told me this is how much it would cost to live, we live a good life. We don't, go to, some people might think it's excessive or not, but just a basic standard life. What we're spending on food now, when I first moved over here and to what the bill is now, I'm like, oh, you'll drop $600-700 a month. Some, depending on how much we're hosting, we have quite a few people in our home, but I thought that is a lot of money, and I wonder how people can survive sometimes when I see their salaries. Because I remember when my wife first started working, she was on 30 grand, I think it was, a year. And we were able to just survive off of that. And whilst I could build, the business side or whatever it was. And with interest rates and currency, I don't think many people understand the import-export side of it, where a good friend of mine who's in that space, he said, depending on the day, it could cost them an extra, tens of thousands, and this is just a small, medium-sized business in the UK, where it puts the risk exposure there, so they have to try hedge the currency and all of that. One of my concerns...
Is this for shipping costs you're talking about?
Yeah, so, with the currency, so he's buying, what do you call it, his units from outside of the UK in euros or dollars.
Okay.
And then if the pound's depreciating, he's having that effect.
The price is variable, isn't it?
But because of the cost per unit, it's quite a big difference, in there. But one of my studies I'm doing currently is on inflation. And because I'm watching it and thinking there's a play in the long term here that I'm concerned Western countries, but specifically the UK, we're at risk of a hyperinflation cycle coming up if we don't get control of this debt problem. Same thing with the US. You can see it there.
Some people would say we're already there.
Now, this is what I want to ask you, is because what I didn't realize in my studies was Zimbabwe, which I saw firsthand with people, millions of people coming into South Africa, which was a country that couldn't handle that migration. And we'll come on to illegal migration later. Just not to be politically incorrect here. But the thing that what took me by surprise is Zimbabwe's hyperinflation cycle really ended in 2008 when it was people, they couldn't buy anything. They had to get paid twice on the same day. They had to go to the dollar. But it started the estimates are 11 to 15 years before that. They started printing beyond their means. And so the delay of that hyperinflation cycle was over a decade. Now, with the UK economy, my concern is that we're already in that, but we haven't realized it. What are your thoughts?
I think that's absolutely true. I think we're seeing so much price suppression, and I think we're seeing so much. It's not just the cost of things; it's the implicit extra costs of things as well. So what I mean by that is that if you, for example, you want to buy a house, let's talk about property. Let's say you go to buy a house. It's not just the price of the house that's the problem. It's the earnings multiplier. So now I think the average earnings multiplier is about 8 for buying your first property. 30 years ago, it was 4. So it's doubled. So it's not just the fact that the house has increased in value, it's the fact that earnings have not kept up. Now, of course, there's a good reason why earnings have not kept up, because raising public sector wages particularly is highly inflationary and will show on the bottom line of the government. So instead, they have to a certain degree suppressed wages. That's, of course, because they haven't got the money to pay them, because it would reveal how bankrupt we were if that were to happen. But equally, that has meant that they've had to, again, go back to the tax question, they've had to tax private companies. So private companies have not been able to put up wages either. So we're living in this slightly surreal environment where everything feels much more expensive. You've got less disposable income at the end of the month. Your standard of living may not have necessarily dropped very much, but you're beginning to feel the squeeze much, much more. And I think that we're seeing this now play out in the bond markets as well, where as I mentioned earlier, interest rates are rising, and I think there is no doubt that we are in a hyperinflationary environment, but in a way, as you say, we haven't seen it necessarily in cash terms. It hasn't happened in cash terms because a lot of it has been absorbed, and a lot of it, of course, has gone into government debt. That's where that inflation is really being held. If we were on the gold standard, for example, which would be a mathematical way of measuring how much additional cash we've got relative to gold, I think you'd find that gold prices would shoot up to probably 25,000, 30,000 pounds per ounce. And that would have an absolute devastating effect, not just on the UK, but probably on the world, because you suddenly see the real cost of everything. At the moment, the problem is we have a mechanism whereby governments don't have proper weights and measures. They're able to do what I call fugazi.
Yeah.
With their money.
Yeah. And I think this is the interesting one because the book, I don't have any attachment to this. It's from Robert Kiyosaki, who recommended it. I think it's Philip Hammond. He's a South African economist. So I'm hoping to be able to interview him at some point, where he went through how important it is to have your currency linked to something.
Yes.
So when
we are nominally linked to the dollar, of course.
Of course, but now, and it was interesting looking at the dollar game, and this is why I'm like watching the perfect storm bubbling here. Is in 1971, Richard Nixon takes the US off the gold standard, and what I didn't realize is it devalued the dollar by 46% immediately, pretty much.
Yes.
And then they had this crisis of how do you pay your debts, from foreign investors and that. And then what he did is he made a deal with Saudi Arabia to get the petrodollar. So all oil would be traded in the US dollar. What I didn't know, and this is where like the conspiracy theory in me comes out, is that if you trace it from there, the US has to protect the linked, if oil wasn't traded in the dollar right now, you'd be in big trouble for the US dollar. And then by default, we would also be in trouble. Because if you look in 2001, when you had 9/11 happen, is not one of those terrorists was from Iraq. But what's his name? I've gone blank.
Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein, of course. He was talking about trading oil in the euro. So he was having those discussions, then that gets taken out. Same thing you see in Gaddafi from, Libya. He comes in, says, okay, we're going to start trading oil in a different currency, talking with the Chinese, all of that. Then suddenly he's taken out. And you ask yourself with Iran now, with the geopolitical side, is, okay, we're going to work with BRICS. We're going to create an alternative thing. We've got to protect that. The reason I bring that up is because when I studied that, I was like, okay, the protecting of the dollar or the pound to something of, intrinsic value that people can recognize is so important, because the ramifications of this is a currency collapse. Can you just explain to people what that would mean if the British pound did collapse completely? What would the effect be on the average person?
At a basic level, currency collapse means that people have lost faith in the currency.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that your currency is worthless. All currencies across the world are fiat, which means that they are based on a trust system. If you go back 300 years, people would have traded via, well, actually, we did have a kind of currency then, but gold and silver, let's say go back to the origins of sound money. You're talking about precious metals, gold and silver. Now, gold is very heavy, and so silver was often used as a trading currency. Of course, people have used lots of different types of trading currency, shells, feathers, all sorts of different things, probably geese, chickens, pigs. But to make it easier, we went on to a paper-based system of currency. And in the US, of course, they had the silver dollar. And the silver dollar was effectively a dollar that you could go into any bank, in theory, in the United States and say, I don't want this note anymore. I want my actual dollar, my silver dollar. Can you give it to me? And then the cashier would have to go off into the vault and get the silver dollar and swap it out, and you'd go away with your silver dollar. So the actual paper currency was linked back to an actual weight and measure, an actual measure of something that was really valuable, silver or gold. As you say, coming off the gold standard in 1971, what that meant was that no longer did we have that benchmark. No longer did we have that. If you print $10 against, let's say 10 pieces of paper. You print 10 pieces of paper. They're each worth 10 cents against $1. So each of those pieces of paper would be worth 10 cents in mathematical terms. However, then what happened was that we developed the fractional reserve banking system, which said that because we're now off that benchmark, but we want to nominally stay on that benchmark so that people don't lose trust because it's a fiat economy now. We've got to keep the trust of the people so they still believe that 10 cents piece of paper, they can go and trade it for something that's worth 10 cents. But the banking system decided that, well, what we could do is we could actually say, if we print another 100 pieces of paper, we have got the actual silver dollar still here, but we can recirculate it much, much faster. And we know that when money goes round a system, money likes flow. Money's good with flow. Money can build up. You can do more transactions. And that's absolutely true. You can do more transactions if you have more paper to do it with. So they built the system to enable them, the central banks, to be able to print money with the idea that they would have enough in reserve banking as it's known. They would have enough in reserve so that if people did want to transact, they did want to trade, they would still be able to do it. With the risk being that so few people would want to do it because they trust the paper, that very few people would go back and say, yeah, I want my silver dollar, because we're now in a trust economy. And because of this amazing movement now of paper, which is much easier than silver, and we've got so much more of it, of course, more people will make more money. And that's absolutely true. That is what's happened. If you look at living standards over the last 50 years, they have massively improved. We've also seen, of course, the cost of certain things reduce because of that paper money system. So there are some benefits to this paper money system. But back to your point about fiat, when currencies collapse, what happens is a majority of the people realize there's too much paper. This paper, how on earth can it ever be worth this silver dollar? It can't. Because we now have 50 million bits of paper for every silver dollar. And what if just half of those people with one of those pieces of paper goes to the bank? We haven't got the money to pay them out. Now, that's a very simplistic explanation. I am a bear of simple brain. So I like these simple analogies.
I'm sure most of us can appreciate that.
So this is what happens, of course, at the same time, is you have... We're part of a global economy. We have investors, we have big external organisations that invest in the UK, we have pension funds, we have huge financial institutions that lend money to the UK. And as we said, we've got 3 trillion worth of debt. Those people said, you know what? Thanks very much, but I don't want to lend you any more money because I actually don't think what you're paying me back in interest is worth anything. So I might be getting 10% interest, but it's actually it's worth nothing because I can't swap that money for anything. And so when fiat economy collapses, it's really the fiat part is the trust part. The trust part completely collapses, and then people don't want that anymore. So a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to South America and travel around. And many of the countries in South America use the dollar as their trading currency. They have their own currency. So particularly in Bolivia, I remember they've got the Boliviano. And the Boliviano has repeatedly had huge inflation happen to it over the last 10 years. It's a very unstable currency. And it's meant that ordinary people who would normally use their Bolivianos to buy things in shops and so on can't trust it anymore. So they have to use the dollar because the dollar is a more steady form of currency. But they still have the Boliviano, but nobody wants it. Nobody wants the Boliviano anymore. If you say to somebody, "Oh, can I pay in Bolivianos?" They say, "¿Tienes dólares?" Do you have dollars? Because really, I don't want Bolivianos, thank you very much, because it's too uncertain. It's similar in a way to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is so flexible, it's so volatile. One day you can be thinking, great, I'm a Bitcoin millionaire. The next day think, oh no, I'm a Bitcoin, I'm a pauper because it's dropped so much. Don't look at your Coinbase account if you're feeling weak, because it takes a certain strength to look at it. I have, as you can tell, a bit of crypto, but it's more dabbling. I'm not a serious crypto investor because it's too volatile for my liking. But that's what happens. And I think that, yes, this is why, of course, what's happening in Iran, we probably don't know the full truth. Why would the American government really tell us the truth? I don't think they would, because I think there's a lot of things that governments don't tell people because they think it will potentially cause massive rupture in society. It will cause social unrest, and it will cause huge fracturing. And on top of the financial issues that they'll be coping with, the government doesn't also want to then be coping with mass protests in the street and people going out mass on strike. This causes a huge upset in society.
And that's what I said to a friend who enjoys his conspiracies, but also it's funny how many times conspiracy theories have turned out true in recent history. And I question everything. But then I said to him, having been in leadership positions in different organizations, I know that sometimes the hardest decisions you have to make are the ones where you can't just tell everyone everything about somebody or whatever, because you want to try and protect that person, and do the right thing by them as well. And so until you're in that room or at that level of government, understanding, you're never going to know. I
think there's also a timing element, isn't there? I think sometimes people will find out. Of course, you have the Official Secrets Act, and we've got various other information constraints and protocols that mean that certain pieces of information will be revealed after a certain length of time, naturally, and they have to be. But I think in government you are dealing with probably some very super sensitive issues, particularly I think when it comes to global politics. And therefore revealing everything. No MP or Prime Minister would do that. They have to restrict what they reveal. But I think in terms of Iran, I'm not saying that we should therefore be privy to all the information, because I think it could cause huge upset. But I certainly think there's more going on than meets the eye, and I think anybody with any insight or wisdom would see that.
And just on that note, because what we might do is do this in two parts, because I'm enjoying the political conversation, is